Hey y'all, it's Adiola here with a book review, and I haven't done a book review in quite a while, so I'm going to try and keep this one short. I know my past ones have been a little bit long, but I'm going to try and keep this one short so I can get back into the flow of doing that. So, the book that I've read, um, and I picked it up, put it down for the past 2 weeks, so I didn't read it fully through. It was 170 something pages, so if I just sat and read it through, I could have finished it in 2 days, but I was just on and off with it. It's The Crying Book. Now, I love this cover. It's gorgeous. And my mom was like, why are you reading a book that looks like that? But it's literally about what it says it's about. It's about crying. And so the author, Heather Crystal, explores the stories in her own life and then what researchers that look into the emotion and the physical act of crying have said about it, and kind of what society says about it, and what it looks like in nature with animals, different stuff. So it's about tears, it's about crying, and I picked this book up when I was in Imperial Beach. Last time I was there was December for New Year's with my brother, and we just went into a bookstore, and I was like, "Oh, that's a cool cover," because I'm very visually oriented. I love colors, I love patterns, design, right? And so I picked it up, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." So this book's about 171 pages, like I said. I will read the little excerpt and then I will go into a couple things that I found really, really interesting about this book. So, a dazzling meditation on tears. In this symphonic work of nonfiction, Heather Crystal explores the most human of behaviors, crying. What are tears made of? Why do people cry? And why is this common, crucial act so rarely discussed? Crystal unpacks the biological reasons for tears and investigates the influence of crying on art, politics, feminism, race, and culture, all while opening up in the intimate personal story of her own tears. From the suicide of her close friend to her family's history of depression to her own pregnancies, both planned and unplanned. In these pages, we meet a feminist artist who designs a gun that shoots frozen tears, a moth that takes sustenance from feeding on the tears shed by animals, and beautifully impractical devices for dealing with grief, such as the lacrimatory, an ancient receptacle into which it's hoped a mourner could let her heart tears fall. While Crystal enchants us with poetic snippets on these subjects, a powerful investigation begins to accrue, examining how the history of tears is tied up with racist violence, with the stigma of mental illness, and the ways in which glib contemporary images of motherhood fail to reckon with how rich and complicated it actually is. Brilliant, witty, and achingly honest, Crystal's book creates a mosaic of science, history, culture, and personal experience to find new ways of understanding life and loss. The Crying Book is deeply intimate tribute to the fascinating strangeness of tears and the unexpected resilience of joy. Whew, very wordy. So one thing I love about this book is kind of the way it's structured. And if you read books that have the typical, paragraph structure, chapter structure, and that's your jam, you probably won't like the way this is structured because it's broken down into these snippets. So it's thought after thought that she's having, little poetry parts. And I kind of like how the page numbers are on the side. That's interesting. I've never seen a book do that. But that's kind of the format of the book, which is very unique to, the typical books that are put out, which are chapter and paragraph organization and structure. So like I said, if you love poetry and you like thinking outside the box, and you're very, if you like theory and you like your ideas to be challenged, you'll probably really like this book and just the way that it's structured as well. Something I thought about before picking this book up was the actual act of crying and tears and why we don't talk about it. We don't talk about crying. It's just something that happens, something that we are quick to cover up and that we're ashamed when it happens, right? When someone starts crying unexpectedly, the first thing they say is, I'm so sorry, or, oh, I don't want to cry, right? Like, those are the two things we hear. No one just like, lets it happen. They're apologetic or, want to hide it, put it away, get it gone as soon as possible. Especially if you're in a public open place. Like if you're at home or if you're with family or something, or a funeral or whatever, like no one's expecting you to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, but if you're in public, like you're at work or you're, in a restaurant or, on a date for the first time, that's not typically places you want to be crying, right? Or at least that's what society tells us. And so a couple things I found interesting is that there's actually 3 different types of tears. Like, I didn't know that. I thought, like, you just cry, right? But there's 3 different types. So the first is called basal, and basal tears are always there. And they're the tears that help lubricate your eyes. So basal tears are just always there. That's what keeps your eyes from drying out, right? Is those basal tears. They're just there. Like if you touch your eyeball, it's wet, right? The second type is irritant. And those are the tears that happen, or the lubricant that happens in your eye when your eye needs to be flushed out of a foreign substance. So like an eyelash gets in your eye, or dust or wind or something. Those tears happen to get rid of the dirt or bacteria or whatever foreign substance should not be in your eye. That's the second type. The third type is called psychogenic, and these are tears that happen and they're produced in expression of emotion. So these are the tears that happen when we're sad, we're crying, or say we're happy and we're laughing. I know for me, when I laugh super, super hard, I start crying. I don't know why, but that just happens to me. And I used to be very like annoyed that would happen. Like, why am I like, I'm literally over here like, like laughing, but like my eyes are crying. So it's just like, those are psychogenic tears as well. We think tears are always sad, but they're not always sad. And that's something I've had to, reconcile within myself, is that I cry when I'm sad. I cry when I'm extremely happy, when I'm laughing. So tears aren't just for sad. Tears happen when you want to, something's in your eye that shouldn't be there. Tears happen to keep your eyes lubricated. So an interesting thought is that we are always crying. It doesn't always like come out that way, but it always happens. Or we always have tears. So that was like the first thing I found interesting. And then, crying also happens and it helps us relieve stress. So anytime you're super stressed out or you're frustrated or whatever, and you're crying, you're like, I don't know why I'm crying. Like, it's because your body, it's reached its capacity of stress in the body and it has to relieve that stress somehow. Some people like to exercise. Some people do other things to relieve stress in the body. But tears are also a result of relieving stress. And if you notice, like after you cry, you feel horrible, to be honest. One second. But often after you cry, there's this like emptiness feeling. The pressure that was there is like released, right? So there's that. And something else I found interesting on like a scientific level is that the hormone prolactin is higher in women. And that's the hormone that plays a part in shedding tears. And so I'm like, that's so interesting. Like women, that's why we're more, I don't want to say more emotional. Everyone has emotions, but why we see women cry more is because we actually have this hormone prolactin. We have a higher count of it than men. So when women are like, well, I just want you to show me your emotions to their significant other who's a man, and like, you never cry, you never show, like they just don't have as much as we do of the hormone prolactin. So there are like some sex differences there, which I'm like, oh, that's interesting too. So I always would ask Sean, like, you just like don't cry as much as I do. And it's true, but also, you know, his body's not producing as much prolactin, so it just doesn't happen. So this book is just like, it makes you think. It's just so good. I'll just read a couple of my favorite parts of the book that have made me think recently. They're very poetic. So at page 80 it says, crying is its own nakedness, and to see both kinds at once elicits a panic of pity. This is why people offer handkerchiefs to each other. It is an act of care, a restoration of dignity, a small instruction to get dressed. Whoa. Right? Like, it's a form of nakedness, right? It's a form of vulnerability to cry in front of someone. And we're often told that we need to shield that part of ourselves. We need to cover it up. And giving someone a tissue is literally saying, like, you're naked, girl. Let me help you. Like, cover that up. Let's put that away. Like, right? And I always think, like, that's so interesting. Like, we want to cover up tears, and we don't want to explore that because it creates something in us, that like a feeling of discomfort in us about the other person crying. It's like we're looking at a naked person, almost. And I wonder why that is, and why, you know, we don't normalize crying and normalize tears and normalize witnessing them, instead of turning away, or, you know, giving someone a tissue, or we feel so uncomfortable to watch people cry. So I just found that was interesting. And then on a more social note, and talking about tears and white individuals, there's an interesting quote in here talking about white women's tears, and how white women's tears are very like weaponized. Like, as soon as you see a white woman crying, like, anybody and everybody wants to help her. It's like a signal of distress, and we want to do something about that, because there's this idea out there, right, that white women are the most like valued and treasured and pure, and we want to keep them safe, right? And so, regardless of race, anybody wants to protect the white woman. And that's why we see, like, with the term like Karens that have come out, and people that make phone calls when they feel uncomfortable, right? And they actually are hurting the other person who is doing nothing wrong, because if it's a white person, right, and they're signaling that there's something wrong, anyone's gonna like jump to that. Like, tears of white women, oh my gosh, what happened? We're not even gonna figure out what happened. Just tell us what to do, right? And so it can actually be very dangerous in our society to react that way to a white woman's tears, right? When you look at Black individuals that cry, it's just not taken as, I don't want to say seriously, but we're not drawn to jump into action to do something about those tears as opposed to white women's tears. So I find that that's interesting. And so, yeah, it's an interesting quote in this book says, the tears of white women are subject to specific scrutiny because their weaponization has often meant violence toward people of color, and Black people in particular. The tears could be real, by which I mean physically present or imagined, metaphorical. Whether they exist on the face of the mind, the tears of a white woman can shift a room's gravity. They set others falling to help her, to correct and punish those who would dare make her weep. So it's like, whether the tears are like actually there or not, there's this idea that we have to jump to help the white woman, you know, when she's crying, and do something about that. And it's often at the detriment of Black individuals or people of color. And I'm not like trying to make this book like a political book, because it only talks about that in one part. But it was interesting to me, because I would see this happen over and over again in media, in movies, in different pictures. Like, there's like virtue signaling with white women, and like how that plays out in our society. So I found that interesting. And then another thing I found interesting, just something to chew on and think about, is most tears happen at night. Most crying happens at night, right? Like late at night. And I can like agree with that little quote she put in the book, because I'm like, well, when have I cried, And every time I've cried, it's been like late at night. Like I'm just tired, right? Like say you're arguing with somebody, or it's just late and you've been up late working, doing whatever, and you're just like stressed, right? Or tired, or emotionally something's going on. Like part of like it being at night is like your body's like so worn down and tired that it finally like gives in to like the crying, right? It's not our first reaction, but it's almost like a fight to not do it. We were born into this world screaming and crying, right? And we cried for, oh, this didn't happen, we cried. That didn't happen, we cried. It was like a signal that something was wrong, and it was like the first signal. And we've gotten so good at covering it up, right? And taming our tears, right? That we can hold so much in without anyone knowing that anything's wrong. And some of that's like societal norms and like what's appropriate or not. And some of that is like really negative, right? To consistently hold back or hold in your tears, or hold in your emotions, and hold in, something's wrong, something is happening to you that's wrong, and continuously holding that in can actually be really harmful. And that's why people turn to drugs, to alcohol, to all of these different things to numb that feeling, to numb the pain, so they don't have to deal with it, they don't have to let it out, because it's almost like being naked. You don't want that in front of somebody, right? So let's just like put it away. But just think about what would happen if you cried openly in front of somebody. Like, just think about that. Think about the idea of crying is not sissy, it's not weak, it's not more feminine, even though women do produce more prolactin. But the idea of tears in and of itself, everybody cries, right? Is, you're relieving stress, you're experiencing your emotions, you're letting things out, you're not holding back and restricting yourself from experiencing life. And so that's kind of what I've taken from this book, is that we really shouldn't hold back so much in life. I'm not saying do stuff that's going to harm you, but I am saying that when something is wrong, don't hold that in, because then it can turn into something else down the road, way more negative. So from my little therapist corner today, if you feel like crying, the next time you feel like crying, just do it. If you're in front of somebody, oh well. If you're not in front of somebody, oh well. Like, don't be so quick to hide your emotions, to cover up your emotions. Explore what's going on with you, why you're feeling that way. But yeah, like, this book was really interesting. Just, I like reading different things on, emotions and human behavior and therapy and self-development. And so this was one of those books that I chose. And if you want to read it, go ahead. For me, it was like a thinking book. It helped you really think about the different things in my life and how I approach them. I love poetry as well. And so it was really interesting to me. But yeah, The Crying Book. I will give this like an 8 because it made me think. And it's something that I can take into the therapy rooms with my clients, and I'm not be quick to, shut them down or to offer them a tissue to cover up their tears, right? But to explore that emotion with them, to go there with them, because often people don't ask you how you're really doing. If you're like really struggling, they don't ask. They just like, it's just normal to say, I'm good, I'm fine. But I want to be a therapist that goes there with my clients, that sits there in that feeling with them, and helps them process it so they can move on and move forward, and not continuously hold back these things that are so painful. So yeah, The Crying Book. I encourage you guys to think about the last time you cried. Think about the last time you cried in front of somebody. Think about how you feel when you cry in public, in private, what that's like for you. So yeah, that was my book review this week. A little bit different. I know everyone's reading books on like Black Lives Matter right now. I'm reading different books. And so this was one that I picked up. You can read it if you would like, and that was my take on the book. So I will talk to you guys later.